Deep beneath the frozen earth, hidden away in a labyrinth of secret bunkers spread across the vast expanse of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin is running out of time, running out of men, and rapidly running out of reality. While hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers are being fed into an unrelenting, mechanized meat grinder on the blood-soaked front lines of Ukraine, the supreme leader of the Kremlin has buried his head so deeply into the sand that he is entirely completely blind to the catastrophic collapse of his own empire. The great ostrich of Russian politics is suffocating in a delusion of his own making. Right now, behind the gilded doors of the Kremlin, the whispers have turned into panicked shouts. The high command knows the truth, the oligarchs know the truth, the intelligence agencies know the truth. The Ukraine war is lost. The Russian military machine has been broken, utterly shattered by a fundamental shift in modern warfare that Moscow is completely powerless to stop. Yet, amidst the smoking ruins of his imperial ambitions, Vladimir Putin remains the solitary figure in the entirety of Russia who still genuinely believes that a victory is possible. But the universe does not care about the delusions of aging dictators. Reality is currently crashing down upon the Russian lines with terrifying, lethal precision. We are witnessing something entirely unprecedented in the history of human conflict. Ukraine has executed a strategic masterstroke so gigantic, so overwhelming, that every single battle plan drafted in Moscow is currently disintegrating into ash. At this very moment, Ukraine holds a massive, unassailable advantage on the battlefield, and it is entirely the result of one specific, terrifying technological evolution that Ukraine has mastered while Russia slept: drones. Not just standard reconnaissance equipment, but an apocalyptic swarm of middle-range and long-range unmanned aerial vehicles that are currently wreaking absolute havoc behind Russian lines. These are not the weapons of the future, they are the grim reapers of the present. Ukraine's mid-range drones have become the apex predators of the Eastern European skies. They are systematically hunting down Russian logistics, obliterating command and control centers, vaporizing ammunition dumps, and completely severing Russia's ability to launch sustained attacks from its rear. Think about what this means on a tactical level. An army cannot fight without bullets, without fuel, without orders. Ukraine has recognized this vulnerability and seized the opportunity with a level of ruthlessness and efficiency that has left Western military analysts absolutely stunned. A vast, unbridgeable gulf has opened up between the nimble, hyper-innovative tech sector of Ukraine and the sluggish, corrupt Soviet-era rust bucket that is the Russian military-industrial complex. Because of this technological supremacy, Ukraine is currently in the strongest, most dominant position it has held in almost a full year. This isn't just optimistic propaganda, this is hard, undeniable intelligence. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed this reality when he revealed classified assessments provided by the highest levels of British intelligence. MI6, one of the most secretive and formidable intelligence agencies on the planet, delivered a blunt assessment to Kyiv. The current situation on the front line is the best it has been for Ukraine in the past 10 months. The tides haven't just turned, they have become a tidal wave, and the mid-range drone swarms are the driving force behind this phenomenal shift. But back in Moscow, the atmosphere is suffocating with unspoken terror. There are highly placed individuals inside the Kremlin, hardened veterans of Russia's military complex, who are desperately trying to sound the alarm. They are screaming that the ship is sinking, but the president of Russia is walking the halls of his palaces with his fingers shoved firmly in his ears, completely insulated by a circle of terrified yes-men. Let's look at the cold, hard facts. The facts that the Institute for the Study of War has meticulously verified. The ISW, a premier American defense think tank, has independently confirmed what the screaming Russian soldiers on the ground already know. Ukraine totally and completely dominates the sky. Russian and Ukrainian battlefield reports both confirm that Kyiv has achieved absolute drone superiority. This isn't just a minor tactical edge. This is the singular reason why Russia's highly anticipated spring offensive stalled out and died in the mud, and it is the exact reason why Ukraine is currently launching devastatingly successful counterattacks. The brilliance of Ukraine's strategy lies in its sequencing. First, they use specialized drones and precision artillery to systematically hunt down and blind Russia's air defense systems. Once the million-dollar Russian missile batteries were turned into smoking craters, safe aerial corridors were ripped open across the sky. Through these invisible highways, Ukraine began funneling their mid-range attack drones, striking deeper, harder, and with terrifying frequency. The Atlantic Council noted that after years of a gritty tit-for-tat technological stalemate, Ukraine has definitively and permanently pulled ahead. They are not just winning the tech war, they are humiliating Moscow on a daily basis. Short-range first-person view, or FPV drones, are turning the first 20 kilometers of the front line into an absolute kill zone for Russian armor and infantry. Nothing moves without being spotted and hunted, but it's the near rear that is truly bleeding. And beyond that, ahead of the 300-kilometer mark, Ukraine's long-range strategic drones are bringing the war directly to Putin's doorstep, striking deep inside the Russian motherland itself. It all boils down to one undeniable reality. Ukrainian technology is vastly superior to Russian technology. This is a bitter pill that Vladimir Putin simply cannot swallow. It destroys his carefully crafted narrative. It shatters the myth of Russian supremacy. It humiliates his legacy. But the numbers do not lie. They tell a story of absolute carnage. Since the beginning of the year, the frequency of Ukraine's mid-range strikes has exploded. In January, reports indicated 41 massive strikes deep behind lines. By February, that number climbed to 61. But March was a bloodbath. Ukraine unleashed 115 devastating mid-range drone strikes in a single month. These deep strikes are just the tip of the spear. They are part of an incomprehensible 11,000 combat missions being flown every single day by Ukraine's newly formed Unmanned Systems Forces. The commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, has unleashed a level of unbridled drone dominance that the world has never seen before. In just 1 month, Ukraine's drone forces identified, tracked, and obliterated over 150,000 verified Russian targets. That is a 50% increase in lethal output in just 30 days. The butcher's bill for the Russian military is staggering. Ukraine's medium-range weapons have shattered 143 vital Russian warehouses and logistics hubs. Without these hubs, Russian soldiers starve, freeze, and run out of ammunition. 52 Russian command posts have been erased from the map, vaporizing the generals and commanders trying to direct the slaughter. Even worse for the Russian economy, 20 major oil, gas, and energy infrastructure facilities in the near rear have been turned into towering infernos. These numbers should be undeniable. They should be the catalyst for a total reevaluation of the war. But in Putin's Russia, the truth is treason. Yet, even in a state built on lies, the alarm bells are ringing so loudly they can no longer be ignored. The Russian hierarchy can clearly see the slow-motion collapse of their entire southern and eastern fronts. They are trying desperately to warn the dictator. In May of 2024, Putin abruptly ousted his longtime loyalist Sergei Shoigu and installed Andrei Belousov as the new defense minister. Belousov, an economist tasked with fixing the massive inefficiencies of the military, has reportedly taken a look at the actual data and recoiled in horror. According to leaked reports from RBC Ukraine, Belousov has directly attempted to warn Putin that the drone situation has officially reached a critical, potentially fatal level for the Russian armed forces. Belousov's assessment is grim. Ukraine has achieved both absolute technological and numerical superiority. The Russian military is being outproduced and out-innovated. To make matters worse, Russia's own drone capabilities have been severely crippled by the loss of illicitly obtained Starlink connections, drastically reducing the effectiveness of their strikes from occupied territories. Meanwhile, Ukraine has rolled out a terrifying new generation of autonomous and electronic warfare-resistant equipment that the Russian military simply does not understand. Russia is wholly unprepared to face this new reality. The man Putin personally appointed to fix the military is screaming from the rooftops that the war, as it is currently being fought, is entirely lost. Unless Putin can miraculously conjure a brand new technological revolution out of thin air, all he is doing is churning the youth of Russia into a meaningless meat grinder. But Putin refuses to listen. He nods, he dismisses, and he returns to his isolated world. If the high command is trying to be diplomatic, the streets of the Russian internet are boiling over with absolute rage. The ultra-nationalist Russian military bloggers, the very people who championed this invasion from day one, are turning against the Kremlin. If Putin weren't so pathologically disconnected from the digital world, he would see his most rabid supporters mutating into his harshest critics. Over the last 4 years, these prominent voices have gone from acting as the Kremlin's personal cheerleaders to openly condemning the monumental incompetence of the Russian general staff. They aren't saying the war was wrong, they are enraged that it is being lost by absolute fools. Take Alexei Chadaev, the head of the center responsible for Russia's own drone development. For years, he couldn't speak without praising Putin's genius. Now, he is openly criticizing the fundamental structure of Russian society. Chadaev publicly claims that Russia has built a feudal backward system that crushes innovation, strips citizens of their rights, and makes it mathematically impossible to keep pace with the agile, decentralized, and highly motivated tech sector of Ukraine. Then you have Rybar, a massive military channel with over 1 million dedicated subscribers. The operators of Rybar are bluntly telling the Russian public that the offensive has slammed headfirst into a brick wall. They are openly warning against any new mass mobilization, stating clearly that throwing more untrained men into the Ukrainian kill zones will just result in a pointless massacre. They are directly accusing Putin's generals of lying to his face, of fabricating reports to keep the president completely isolated in his sea of delusion. Think about the magnitude of this. The very foundation of Putin's authoritarian regime, his propaganda mouthpieces, are openly attacking his tactics, his commanders, and the very state he has spent 25 years building. They aren't doing this because they want peace. They are doing this because they are terrified. They want Putin to wake up, to accept the brutal reality of the battlefield, and to realize that Soviet-era human wave tactics, which have resulted in over 1.3 million total casualties so far, are utterly useless against a sky filled with artificial intelligence and explosives. But while the Russian offensive is drowning in its own blood, the situation for Moscow is actually escalating into an even more severe crisis, because Ukraine isn't just winning on the attack. They are achieving something miraculous on the defensive front. The skies over Ukraine are rapidly becoming a fortress. Ukrainian interceptor drones, cheap, highly maneuverable, and devastatingly effective, are completely neutralizing Russia's primary weapon of terror. The long-range Shahed attack drones that Russia launches by the hundreds are being swatted out of the sky before they can even reach their targets. The interception numbers are staggering. In January, Ukraine shot down 2,975 Russian drones. By February, as their systems improved, that number jumped to 3,679. But in March, the data from the ISW shows that Ukraine absolutely shattered records, ripping 7,674 Russian drones out of the sky in a single month. You cannot underestimate how catastrophic this is for Moscow. The entire premise of Russia's strategy was to use cheap drones to bypass the battlefield, shatter Ukraine's energy infrastructure, plunge the civilian population into freezing darkness, and destroy the will to fight. It was a strategy of pure terror, but now, that strategy is dead. As Ukraine's interception rate approaches total effectiveness, Russia has literally no answer. Ukraine is cracking open the Russian rear, burning their oil depots to the ground, while Russia is completely failing to do the same in return. The technological balance of power hasn't just shifted, it has flipped entirely. And how has Vladimir Putin responded to the burning of his infrastructure and the slaughter of his men? He retreats further into his fantasy world. He doubles down on the fabricated narrative that Russia is still operating from a position of unstoppable power. We saw this delusion on full display recently, when confronted with the irrefutable evidence that Ukraine has blown past Russia in drone warfare. Putin didn't order a change in tactics. He didn't fire his failing generals. Instead, on a day when Russia lost a staggering 1,440 soldiers in a single 24-hour period, Putin simply offered up more cannon fodder to the Ukrainian drones. His only political response was to lash out wildly at NATO. He fired off limp, desperate warnings to the Baltic states, accusing them of facilitating Ukraine's long-range strikes. Putin threatened Estonia, Latvia, and Finland, claiming that there would be dire consequences if they allowed Ukraine to use their airspace to strike Russia's Baltic Sea oil infrastructure. But this is the rambling of a man who does not understand the battlefield. The Baltic nations aren't flying these drones, Ukraine is. Ukraine's drones are traversing massive distances, bypassing Russian radar, and plunging into the heart of Russia's oil economy. By late March and early April, Russia's two main Baltic ports were completely paralyzed, shut down as Ukrainian drones relentlessly pounded them into submission. Putin throws around the same tired nuclear threats he always does, entirely misunderstanding the real threat. It's not NATO that is destroying his oil refineries, it is his own purposeful suicidal delusion. The chief delusion being the belief that the Russian military is still capable of winning. Prominent Western analysts are astounded by this level of psychological denial. Robert Fox, the defense editor at The Standard, recently laid out the absolute absurdity of Putin's refusal to accept reality. Fox noted that Ukrainian forces are striking deep into the Russian heartland, causing massive systemic economic damage. The destruction is so severe that it is even bleeding into heavily censored Russian newspapers. The Russian public can see the black smoke rising from their cities, but Putin is in absolute complete denial. He is truly the last man in his own government who believes this war can be salvaged. The Kremlin tells him the situation is critical. The defense minister tells him the troops are dying for nothing. The bloggers tell him the tactics are suicidal. Yet Putin refuses to listen. The ultimate question facing the world right now is simply this: how long can one man's denial hold together a collapsing empire? In March alone, Russia's monthly casualty rate spiked by an unbelievable 29%, reaching a record-breaking 35,351 dead or wounded in a single month. 96% of those casualties were inflicted by drones. The sheer scale of the slaughter is mind-numbing. In a single day, March 17th, Russia suffered 1,710 casualties. A week's worth of fresh, terrified recruits were wiped off the face of the earth in just 72 hours. It is a messy, uncoordinated massacre of Putin's patsies, battered on the front line and incinerated in the rear. But human life has never mattered to the Kremlin. Death on the battlefield does not register on Putin's radar. He views his citizens as biological currency, meant to be spent to secure his place in history. What might actually penetrate his thick armor of delusion is the sudden catastrophic destruction of his wealth. The Ukrainian strikes on the Baltic ports have vaporized nearly $1 billion in expected oil revenues. A massive windfall created by surging global oil prices following geopolitical instability in the Middle East was literally snatched out of Putin's hands and burned to ash by Ukrainian drones. Even the international community has stopped treating Putin like a master strategist and started addressing him like a failed, desperate gambler. French officials recently stated bluntly that Putin must face facts. The war of aggression has drained his country, humiliated his military, and destroyed his legacy. It is a strategic, political, and economic disaster of historic proportions. Russia's global influence is evaporating. In Africa, the European Union is now investing massively, sweeping away Russian influence. From Venezuela to Syria to Iran, the axis of autocrats that Putin relied upon is crumbling. He is collapsing on the global stage just as rapidly as his army is collapsing in the Donbass. Surely a rational human being would start listening. The burning oil depots, the millions of dead and mutilated soldiers, the cratering Russian economy, the terrifying high-pitched whine of Ukrainian mid-range drones hunting down multi-million-dollar radar systems. At least one of these things has to break through the psychological walls of the Kremlin. But Putin is not rational. He is gripped by an incredibly toxic, crippling paranoia. This is a man who famously refuses to use a smartphone. He does not use the internet. He lives in a highly curated information vacuum, relying solely on physical red folders handed to him by a shrinking inner circle of sycophants who are absolutely terrified of bringing him bad news. Anyone who speaks the truth too loudly tends to meet a sudden violent end, a suspicious fall from a high-rise window, a sudden cup of poisoned tea, or a fabricated corruption charge designed to silence dissent. The entire system is built on fear and lies, and it is rotting from the inside out. There are rumors swirling through Western intelligence that Putin is so desperate for cash that he is privately extorting Russia's remaining oligarchs, forcing them to personally fund the war effort out of their own pockets. A war that was supposed to take 3 days has dragged on, bleeding the nation dry, and things are only getting worse. The absolute terrifying reality for Moscow is this: the war is lost. There is no magical weapon, no brilliant tactical maneuver, and no endless reserve of manpower that can reverse the fundamental shift in warfare that Ukraine has pioneered. The skies belong to Kyiv. The nights belong to the drone swarms. And as the robotic apex predators of the Ukrainian military continue to systematically dismantle the Russian war machine piece by piece, Vladimir Putin sits alone at the end of a very long table, staring at a map of an empire that is already dead.